Am I supposed to be talking now? Okay. Hey, welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlin.
I am Ben Lander.
And hopefully the rest of the show will go better than our opening just did. So, welcome very much. Thank you very much for joining us for Trinity Talk Live. For those of you who haven't watched the show before, let me tell you a little bit about what it's all about and how it works. Like I said, our byline here is water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective, which means that what we try to do is we talk about whatever the heck is going on in the world, but we talk about it from a Christian perspective. There's no shortage of media sources out there on the internet where you can hear everybody's opinion about whatever's going on, but sometimes a shortage of hearing a Christian opinion on what's going on. And so that's what we try to do. We're not perfect. We're fallible people. You may agree with us. You may disagree with us. We may agree or disagree with each other as the show goes on. But we're going to do the best we can. And along those lines, we also invite you to be part of the show. This is live. If you're watching us live at 12 noon on Monday, we are on both the Trinity Joppa Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can comment in the live chat or the comment section on either one of those. I have them here on my computer, so I can see Andrew Kassouf, for example, just posted a smiley face. See how that works? How you doing, Andrew? Thank you for helping me demonstrate. So the idea is you can post your comment on either YouTube or Facebook, and I will see it, and I will read it out loud at some point once we get to a stopping point here, and we can answer any questions, respond if you agree with us, disagree with us, whatever it may be. And if I miss it, my wife has lovely signs back there that she'll hold up to let us know that we have a Facebook comment or a YouTube comment in case I happen not to see it. So Andrew did I say he commented on Facebook? He didn't. He commented on YouTube. See, I don't even know which tab I've got up there, but whatever.
It was a comment.
It was a comment. It was a smiley face either way, and we appreciate it. So anyway, so that's the long and short of it. Please comment in the live chat. Be part of the show. Let us know what you think. Whether you agree with us, disagree with us, or if there's something else going on in the world today that we're not talking about that you want to know our opinion on, throw it in the chat, and we'll let you know what we think the best we can. So did I miss anything?
No. Oh, other than it is not chit-chat, it's water cooler conversation.
It is water. Yes, it is not chit-chat. See, these are little things that you all don't know unless you're here before the cameras turn on. You see, we have fun. So anyway, all right, so that's the quick abbreviated intro. Let's get right into it, shall we? Ben, what's our first story?
All right, so our first story comes from the Christian Post, and it's an interesting Barna study. Barna is the group of, I'm supposed to be looking at this camera. We rearranged the cameras here, so forgive me if I'm getting used to which one to look at. So the Barna study was just released. Barna, if you're unfamiliar, is research. Particularly, they do a lot of Christian polls and things just to kind of get a pulse on Christianity in specifically America, but they do things that are not particularly American as well. So this particular Barna study says 1/3 of practicing Christians not watching online church services during COVID-19 lockdown. So apparently this recent study went across all different types of demographics, millennials, Gen Xers, boomers, specifically those were the three generations that it targeted, and tried to track their online attendance, so to speak, whether they were engaging with their home church or even a different church, or if they just were not engaging at all in online church. And what it found was, let's see if I can pull up the exact statistics here. So it revealed that 35% of Gen Xers and 26% of baby boomers had foregone digital attendance. So those are the ones that have not been watching, as opposed to, I think it's up here actually, millennials, it's much higher, which basically speaks to the trend, let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to scan this.
It was half of millennials. It was 50-50 on millennials.
Right.
And then, but only 35% of Gen X and 20% of baby boomers had not been watching. So,
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so speaking to just the general trend, which this article actually even draws out, is that the trends were already there pre-COVID. Just COVID has kind of exacerbated those trends, wherein the millennial demographic it really has highlighted their disillusionment with institutionalized religion, and we're seeing that in those who have not engaged whatsoever with either their home church or any church, and have gone away. So I'll throw it over to you, Ken. What do you make of these statistics, and do you think it's an accurate representation or from what we've seen?
Yeah, I mean, probably, because it's nothing that's particularly surprising. I mean, we've seen these kind of trends before in the church as a whole, where there's been a priority on people have been expressing this priority on reaching the younger generation, so to speak. Now, what I do find interesting about it, if you want to call it that, is you would think that when we're in a largely digital era, that if there was a way, if there ever was a way to reach more of those younger generations, it would be by having church be, in a digital format. And so what's interesting, and what this study actually doesn't reflect, is it talks about how you've got about 50-50, more than half of practicing Christian millennials had not attended church in the past 4 weeks. I'm curious how they defined practicing millennials to begin with, because how does that 50% number compare to how often they were going to church when it wasn't digital?
Correct. What does practicing mean?
Yeah.
You got to define the term there.
Because if it's pretty much the same number, or maybe we'll consider practicing, you've gone once in the last 2 months, and these people were going once every 2 months, and now they're going 50% of the time. It's actually an increase. So
right.
I'm not saying that's probably not the case, but that the raw number of just the 50% now doesn't really tell us anything unless we know what their attendance habits were beforehand. And
unless you had some way of plotting the trends of each individual of what they were doing pre-COVID and
right.
since.
And so, and maybe the study has that in there. I don't know. I'm sure it probably does have some definition for practicing that we're just not getting in this article. But assuming that the way this article kind of spins it is correct, and that is that they're not going to, the younger generations just aren't going to church as much as the older generations are. I mean, does that surprise you at all? I mean,
no, I mean, speaking from a millennial perspective, that really doesn't surprise me.
You've been to church in the last 4 weeks, right?
I have, and even if I'm not here, I'm attending online. I mean, that's been kind of weird anyway, but it's been good that we're able to provide that service online. And you're right. If there was ever a time that we should be reaching a younger generation, the millennial generation, then this would be it. So clearly, there's a disconnect between what the church at large is doing, even in our digital outreach, and what's actually effective in engaging them.
Right, and and that I'm sorry, that reminds me, what my biggest takeaway from this is exactly that. How often, let's think back before COVID, all right? And all these churches everywhere were saying, we need to reach the younger generation, we need to reach the younger generation. And it seems to me overwhelmingly, the response of how we're gonna do that was always, well, let's have this thingamabobber or that thingamabobber, it was, whether it be adding more screens or lights or the flashiness or
fancy,
but it was all in the delivery. Everything that was, as far as how we're going to reach millennials, was let's update our delivery. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with updating your delivery per se. That's not the point. But I think what this illustrates for us is that updating the delivery, just the delivery of your whatever your worship service or whatever, is not ultimately going to do anything. You need to reach the people and ask what the people's needs are.
Right. And actually, speaking to, generally I don't tend to look at all of the comments on articles like these, but one of them actually did stick out for one reason or another. I was looking through the comments on this, and it's up toward the top a little bit, but I actually found it striking. This is Edward, forgive me, I'm going to butcher your last name, Vasicek. And so he says, so many modern Christians do not want the word, and the word that is best communicated online. We have turned many of our churches into adrenaline-exciting rock concerts, and that cannot be achieved online. I know a survey like this cannot go deep, but my suspicion is that Christians who prioritize the word are online, and those after a musical fix are not. That struck me because something that Reese says that she got from one of her mentors was, whatever draws people to a church or to a youth group or to whatever draws people, you're going to have to use to keep them there, right? So if what's drawing people is flashy lights and, you know, a rock concert atmosphere. And, you know, when the trends change, then you're going to lose people if you don't change with those trends. And what doesn't change is the word. And so I think what needs to be engaging people is the word of God, and how do we reach into people's lives with the word of God. And, you know, you kind of have to expect, looking at the culture and looking at what we know the Bible tells us will happen as we progress toward Jesus' eventual return, is there will be a falling away. And so we can't be surprised by that to some extent. But that doesn't mean by any means that we should stop being faithful in preaching the word. And I think we remain true to that. Now, again, like you're saying, there's nothing wrong with utilizing whatever we have available to us to achieve that, so long as that doesn't overshadow the message itself.
Yeah, and Andrew Andrew Kasuf on YouTube says, I believe that people who have been actively walking with Christ for a period of time, there's a higher likelihood that they will engage in worship in person or online. Yeah, and it's the more it becomes part of your identity, really, then clearly I think it's going to be more important. I mean, I know, you know, there was a time when I was younger, you know, at my college age, I've talked a little bit in other forums about kind of how I drifted away. And even then, at that time, it was like if I went to church, you know, once a month, and, you know, that was, I didn't feel wrong. It may be wrong. You know, I didn't feel wrong the Sundays that I wasn't there. Whereas
you feel like you were missing something.
Yeah, I do. Exactly. If I miss now, I feel like I'm missing something.
Absolutely.
There's a hole there that you know, that's part of my life that I should be that I feel needs to be filled. Andrew's had another comment here. The best way to reach people in a particular demo is to include them in the conversation. If a church wants millennials, then they should have millennials in leadership helping to frame the experience. Amen, Andrew. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to draw a parallel. It's not specifically reaching millennials, but what we just did with the food truck. You know, we wanted to reach people in a particular community, and so we knew obviously these people in this community had, you know, need for food, and so we my wife running the food closet ministry, and yourself as our the column head or whatever, and myself, we all kind of put this plan together, and we got this truck, loaded it up with groceries, and we went into the community to bring the groceries to them. But one of the things we were there wasn't just, you know, here, come on up here, here's your bag. Come on up here, here's your bag. Come on up here, here's your bag. It was, how else can we serve you?
Right.
Let us not be presumptuous about, we're not going to try to assume we know what you need. We don't know what you need. You know what you need.
Right.
So let's talk to the actual people who we're trying to help. Same principle. You want to know how to minister to millennials, ask millennials.
Right. And that was intentional, you know, with the food truck. We intentionally wanted it to be not just a handout, you know, we're engaging with the people, right? So it's building a relationship too. It's more than just giving them something. It's a relationship building. And I think the same goes for, you know, using the food analogy. It's like those who are...
Food analogies are dangerous when I haven't had lunch yet, by the way. Go ahead.
Yeah, me either. But sticking with the food analogy, when you have somebody who's less mature in their faith, it's like there are laws. If you look at children, there are laws where you can't leave a child unattended by themselves until a certain age because they can't care for themselves. In the same way, a Christian who is not mature yet doesn't know how to feed themselves, doesn't know how to get that spiritual maturity. And this article kind of points to that those who have not been attending church regularly during lockdown have experienced a greater level of anxiety, greater level of disturbance in their life. They have no peace with God. And so I don't know if that exactly correlates to like those younger in their faith per se, because the study didn't really go into that. But my suspicion is that those who are less mature in their faith are less likely to feel like they're missing something, feel like they can, you know, I don't need to be at church to have a relationship with God. And so, but then those Christian habits go by the wayside, and then they're kind of just off on their own, fending for themselves.
And they have these other side effects, if you want to call it, that the study notices. Yeah.
Right.
And so there is a direct parallel. And so getting into, you know, the proper role of the bells and whistles, if you want to call it that, you know, the online, you know, and keep in mind, this is, again, we always disclose our biases. Yeah. This is my job here. So, so yes, obviously I think there's a role for the technology and the bells and whistles, because I don't want to be fired, but no.
Well, we're currently streaming right now, so clearly
exactly.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's got to be, there's a role for that. And there's a role for that even when we're not in a pandemic. I mean, obviously in a pandemic right now, there's a role for that because this is how you're going to be able to reach people and get into their homes and communicate with them. They still have to turn on the TV or turn on the computer, though. But even outside, there's a certain portion probably of almost every congregation that is homebound or, maybe there's out of town for the weekend. And I know that when I am feeling, like I said, if I miss something on the weekend, I feel empty. And I got news for you. We haven't vacationed. I won't say how long it's been since our family took a vacation, but whenever that point was, many eons ago, even that, we always make sure that even when we're out of town, we make plans to do something on Sunday morning or whatever, if it's even visiting a local church wherever we're at, because there's an empty hole there. And so there's definitely a proper role for the technology, for the bells and whistles, but it's got to be that. And you can't just put your worship services out there online and expect that's going to solve every problem. You still need to make the personal connections with people that are out there.
Absolutely.
And Allison Mayer has a couple comments for us here. I'm sorry?
You have another comment from Andrew and then two from Allison.
Okay.
But before you do that, I wanted to ask a question myself because I missed whether you said it or not. Did it say when the survey took place? When they started surveying people about their attendance online?
It talks about since the state lockdowns in response to coronavirus. So it doesn't give the specific dates, but I'm guessing this was in the heart of the lockdowns, not since things have started to reopen.
The only reason I'm wondering is because not a lot of churches were in the position that Trinity was to go quickly to offering the online option, and that might have also had a detrimental effect on people's ability to, and there are some churches that are still not doing it because they don't have the technology available to them. So I was just wondering if people had to then do the extra step of searching out
another church,
I
think that's what reflected in those who have migrated, so to speak.
A home online church.
Right.
That
It
they
did
didn't
talk
have to
about
do before.
people looking at watching either their own church or other churches online. It talked about a relatively low percentage that had actually migrated to a different church during this time.
Okay.
What about 14%?
Well, I know in some other churches they were just doing sermons, and so they weren't really doing a worship service, but they were doing a sermon. I was just wondering if those also counted.
I would assume.
I'm sorry,
so.
it's the
any
statistician.
kind of connection, whatever your church was doing. All right, so we got a lot of comments here to pick up on here.
Sure.
So Andrew's third comment here was, I forget where I read this, but there is a much higher chance of a person sticking with their faith walk if they have encountered Christ before 14 or 15 years old. Youth ministry is key for the future. As an apologist, Andrew, let me just say amen. Because what happened, and I don't remember where exactly I've read it or not, but this is something that I've learned in my education over the years, is that your worldview is largely formulated during those teenage years, and it's not that people don't change their worldview as adults, but it's a lot harder to change it once it's an adult. So you're absolutely right.
And going back to your example, if I can just kind of touch on that comment too, Andrew, what Ken just shared, even when you guys are on vacation and you make it a point to do something on a Sunday morning, whether it's visiting a local congregation down there, that does more than just fill you as your own spiritual walk, but what it conveys to your whole family, your children, that this is important. This is something that we take time for, and I think that has a lot to do with it too. How you're, what's instilled in you as what are your values. If you're a Christian but you don't really hold that as like your key identifier, then that's it's going to show.
Yeah. Allison Mayer, let me see. She says 3 comments here. I'm just going to read them 1, 2, 3. Says, I don't think this issue is new, but there's always been a struggle with keeping young people in the church or attending worship as they get older towards adulthood. When I speak to people about getting older and staying in church, they lack a personal faith. It seems they think their faith is their parents' faith. I gotta get what you're. That's another conversation, how we can encourage this population of people to take ownership of their faith and make it their own. Yeah, and that's what we were talking about at the beginning. I agree with you, Allison. When you asked me off the bat, does this surprise you at all? It's like, well, no, it's pretty much what we were seeing outside of the digital context.
Right.
And now we're just seeing expressed in the digital context.
Right.
And I guess, all right.
Who was it who referred to when the confirmation kids about renting your faith from your
Yeah,
parents.
I was just going to go
Yeah.
there with
Rent to own.
Allison. We were talking about owning your faith. You know, we always go, and Reese and I take the confirmation students. Now this year it's kind of been a wonky year, but typically when we do our end of year retreat with our 8th graders, our confirmation students, we have a session where we talk with them, and that's kind of the main point that I try to make is it's like a house. You know, when you own a house versus when you rent a house. When you own a house, you're invested in it. You've put your own effort. You've got stock in it. When you're renting a house, it's not as like typically when you see, and Reese even chimes in because she worked in real estate. Typically when you see houses that are rented, they're not as well taken care of. They're just kind of because it's not you don't have as much responsibility with it. And so what we ask the confirmation students is, are you owning your faith? Do you have you made a personal decision, basically, and we'll get into whole
Decision theology.
I know,
Decision
and I know it's
theology.
not decision theology.
We're still Lutherans.
but-
Sorry.
We are, yeah. But have you taken, okay, I'll say not have you made a personal decision. Well, have you taken on the responsibility yourself? Because what we tell the confirmands is, what confirmation is, it's an affirmation of baptism. When you're baptized in the Lutheran tradition, is your parents with sponsors stand up there and they kind of step in and fill in that gap for you for your faith, and you're kind of borrowing their faith up until that point where you're confirmed, and now they're taking a step forward and owning their faith and saying, yes, actually what my parents have been teaching me, and hopefully, ideally, the sponsors have been guiding me and shaping me in my faith. Now I'm taking ownership of that. It's like handing the keys over to your own house. You're now the owner.
And I think there's an important thing to remember here is that it's one thing to tell the kids, you need to own your faith, and there's another thing to kind of walk alongside them as they're doing that, because it's kind of like, you can get any context, it's like, oh, you need to do X. Oh, that's great telling me I need to do X, but actually doing X
Right.
is a different matter, and it's kind of like it's just have faith. Oh, okay, it's just like to flip on a light switch.
Yeah.
Everybody's faith journey is going to be different, and one thing I always encourage our youth leaders to do is, hey, listen to your youth. Understand number one, there's not going to be a one size fits all path that they're all going to be on. And I use this analogy sometimes with Reese and I when we talk, because I love Reese to death. She and I have very different faith walks, in the sense that she looks at my apologetic stuff sometimes, and I tell her, she's just like, don't care about any of that, It just it doesn't. Her faith isn't dependent upon that, and that's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. And there are going to be little Reese's in any kind of confirmation class.
Yeah.
Then again, there are also going to be little Kens,
Sure.
that have questions, or not so little Sarah's, as we talked a little bit about last week about the question she came and asked me about that she'd seen out there. And so we do need to foster an environment that we're open to questions and sincere questions to the faith, because so many of our young people leave their faith as they leave their house, as they leave their parents. And not to say this is universal, but a large portion, it's attributed to the fact that they never got adequate questions or answers to questions that they had, and they still linger those questions. And guess what? If you don't answer them, someone's going to.
Case in point, we talked about that with the lead singer of Hawk Nelson.
Yeah.
Right? So he had that same argument. He didn't have sufficient answers, he felt. And that's why I always, when I talk to youth or really just anybody, I do, same as you're saying, is encourage questioning, because, if your entire belief system comes unraveled just by asking a simple question, then how strong of a foundation was there to begin with? And so maybe sometimes you need to break down and build that back up. But don't just accept things at face value either. Jesus himself tells us, ask, seek, knock, and you will find. It's in the process of that seeking that we will find him, right? And so we shouldn't just give up and say, oh, well, I didn't get the answer I wanted, so I'm out.
Well, and that gets back to what I think both Andrew and Allison were saying in their comments too. But we see that an awful lot, don't we? Where people it's like, well, there's one question I never got the answer to, and I read those articles when I hear that, and it's like, really? You didn't get an answer to that?
How hard you look.
How hard you look, because there's plenty of answers out there,
Yeah.
So anyway, all right. That's great. We need to move on to our second topic here for the day, though, because we got 4 we're trying to get through today, and we have another filming appointment in an hour. It's a busy day today. We got this at noon. We're doing some VBS filming at 1:30, and then we got Kids Zone Live at 4, so make sure you tune in for that as well. All right. Excuse me. Our next story here comes from the wonderful world of Twitter. And so this is going to be, and I will say this up front because the article wasn't entirely clear. I looked things up myself. All the exchanges on here are on Twitter, which, if you know anything about Twitter, you're limited in the number of characters, and so there's certainly some potential contextual things we're not getting here. But then again, if you put your comments on Twitter, that's your fault, not ours. So
that's the medium that you chose.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna go with what's said here. So Jameel Smith is a senior writer for Rolling Stone, and he actually recently, I guess, retweeted a tweet from a political activist, Reverend Dr. William J. Barber. So it starts with Dr. Barber's tweet, and what Dr. Barber said was this. He said, ironically, the governors most willing to watch their citizens die, referring to all the protests and everything going on right now, the rioting, are the ones who have used pro-life rhetoric to compel people of faith to support the narrow interests of corporate greed and white political power. COVID has revealed how the pro-life movement is killing us. And then Jameel Smith, who's this, like I said, a senior writer with Rolling Stone, agrees with that. And retweets it, I guess, and he tweeted, this point cannot be emphasized enough or too often. The moniker pro-life, so often used in the service of not just misogyny, but also racism, should be retired right along with Aunt Jemima and the Redskins team name. So, without going into the Washington Redskins or Aunt Jemima, because we've already talked about those, I think, previously on the show, let's focus on the tweet and the suggestion that pro-life, the term itself, pro-life, is somehow racist. What do you think?
Well, I struggle to see how any term in and of itself can be inherently racist or misogynist. Now, I guess there's slang and racial slurs that we should not use, obviously, but something like pro-life, I mean, I really struggle to see how that can be. The whole take away all of your baggage about pro-life. Look at the word itself. Pro, you're for something. Life, I mean, hello, we're all alive. I think we all want to stay that way, or have a better one in eternity. And so I don't see how that's detrimental to anybody.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing here is a bait and switch. It's not the term itself per se that he's objecting to. It's the movement. It's the concept of being pro-life. And okay, I'm gonna play. I hate using the term devil's advocate because but essentially I'm gonna look at things, put on my other hat, and I'll say, okay, how could he possibly be interpreting this as racist? Because I got to be honest with you, statistically speaking, more African Americans undergo abortions than Caucasians do, by far. All right, and so my initial thought when I saw this was, how can you possibly say this is racist? Because if the pro-life people prevail, the overwhelming number of survivors of new kids are going to be African Americans,
right?
And so the pro-life movement is actually trying to create more African American lives on this planet.
Yep.
Now, I mean, obviously that's not the per se goal. The goal is life in general, but
Correct.
as a practical effect, that's what would happen. And I think what we see here is it boils down to, again, the same things we see in the pro-life versus pro-choice discussion to begin with. It's the same matters of interpretation. Here's how I think you could try to say, if you were a pro-choice advocate, that the pro-life movement is racist. Because most abortions are received from African Americans. Therefore, by trying to end abortions, you are disproportionately targeting African Americans in trying to prevent them from having that choice. But you see what we see is both positions still boil down to the same thing. It's and this is I think it was Greg Kokel who says this. It boils down to the question of what is it? What is it that's being terminated in there? Because if it's just another organ of the woman's body, like a kidney, then take it out. No justification is needed.
Right.
But if it is an innocent human life with rights of its own, then no justification is sufficient.
Right.
And that's the thing. It's like the idea of calling it racist is because it's focusing on the right of the woman to choose to do this. All right. Whereas saying that it's actually
same with misogynist too.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
It focuses on the right of the woman.
Exactly. Whereas saying that it's no, it's actually pro-African American in the sense that we're trying to foster more African American lives is focusing on the fact that what is in the womb is a human life with its own rights. And so I think this is why I preface this by saying this was a tweet. We're reading a whole lot into what's limited characters. I think that what it's getting at, but ultimately it's still assuming its conclusion. By saying it's racist, you can only get there if you first assume that this is something that women should have a right to do.
And I think, moreover, by attacking just the term itself, I think we're seeing the same tactic of setting up a straw man argument, and that's what cancel culture is all about. It's the straw man cancel culture argument, where you say you take a pro-life, for example, and then extrapolate it out and say this is about, there's a disproportionate amount of African Americans, setting up this whole separate issue. Again, like that bait and switch, and now we should cancel the whole thing, right? And that's what cancel culture wants to do, just pull the rug out from everything. And again, you can get into the whole Redskins and Aunt Jemima, but you're seeing that. Well, even with transgenderism, you look at J.K. Rowling was recently in
canceled.
Canceled, yeah, as part of cancel culture because she dared, and hers was kind of similar because she was talking about the phrase, like she said, I will even go to a march for transgender rights and all of that. She didn't argue any of that. She said, but as a just, I don't know if pedantic is the right word, but just as a matter of biology, I find it hard as a woman how you can't just be how you have like a spectrum that is just one. You really are. You're just one or the other. And for that, she was canceled. Let aside that she said that she was for transgender rights. But that wasn't enough. That's still like you got to cancel all or nothing.
We have this mentality nowadays where you have to agree with this 100% in March. And, we're seeing that, to be honest, we're seeing a lot of people within cancel culture turning on their own, you might say, in that regard, that there's this idea that, if you don't completely agree with me, then you should be silenced. And we've talked about that on the show before. That is not my position at all. I mean, I believe that even people I disagree with should not be silenced. Now, getting back to your point at the beginning, I agree that there are certain things we should be trying to empathize with other people and not cause unnecessary offense. Sure. So are there certain words we shouldn't use? Yes.
Sure.
Yes, there are, because they serve no purpose other than to cause offense, really. Yeah. Why do you do that? That's unnecessary. But as far as just topics and opinions and thoughts, I think we're far better served if we allow these things into the marketplace of ideas and allow the marketplace ideas to sort out what's good and what's bad. Tim Foster on Facebook says, Deuteronomy 30:19, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life that you and your offspring, babes, may live. Choose life. And Tim, this gets into the heart of the debate on the pro-life versus pro-choice.
Right.
Well, actually, no, it doesn't. All right, there's two, I'm not going to get overly philosophical here, but there's two different discussions to have when we're talking about the abortion. One is it a human life? All right, and virtually everybody, there's actually some exceptions to this now, but virtually everybody is going to concede that from the moment of conception, and I know moment is a loaded term too, but that's one of those things where it's so silly to me. I'm sorry, it's like
split hairs.
It's splitting hairs because we all can look at something and tell when conception has happened, even if conception isn't instantaneous like that. That's an irrelevant distinction you're trying to make. But anyway, leaving that aside for a moment, is it a human life post-conception? Absolutely. You can't claim to be at all pro-science and deny that fact at all. It is absolutely a human life. Its own DNA signature, everything is just an earlier stage of development. The separate question is it a human person? And that term means, does it enjoy rights? And that's a philosophical question, and that's different. And so when in my mind, I have a very hard time I challenge anybody to convince me that you can be a human being, a human life, and not a human person simultaneously. Right. Okay, they may be different things, like we're talking about, talking about the Trinity, where you're talking about, a nature versus a person. Those are different concepts, but can you be a person without a nature? It's like
right. It's not conversed. Yeah.
Right. You can't. They're not. There's different concepts, but they're still going to be intertwined in a being. And the same thing here when we're talking about human beings. I think that the concept of being a human life and a human person are so intertwined that yes, if you're a human being, you are a human person, and you do have a right to life. And so then, Tim, I would agree with you that passage of the Bible throughout talks about honoring life. That's my philosophical.
And you had spoken before about it. It's better to err on the side of caution if it's not a human person, but it is a life.
Yeah, you're referring to that gentleman in my class that I was referring to having the conversation with, who was trying to say that he felt that abortion, he was pro-life, but he felt abortion in the first trimester was permissible because at that point or basically until the baby has brain waves and a heartbeat, that it should be okay. They didn't think God has imparted a soul into it yet at that point, and therefore it's okay to kill it. And I just at that. We won't rehash all those arguments, but the problem is anytime you draw a line like that, it inevitably falls apart, other than the conception. And the example I gave at that point was, well, if anytime you set a biological fact benchmark, you say, well, you're not a person, or you don't have a soul, or whatever it is, until you biologically develop the ability to do X, right? You always can come up with examples. Well, what about people who don't have that biological ability, or they lose that biological ability? They're still alive, but maybe they're unconscious in a coma or something like that. Can I kill them?
Or what about something that's not even human but has that benchmark?
Right.
Like a sophisticated AI.
And the example I gave with this one, where he's talking about, I don't think God imparts a soul until that. I said, well, wait a minute. So you're saying that a soul is somehow, the presence of a soul is somehow tied to your biological development, that you can't have a soul until you have these certain biological features? Well, then how is it the soul survives after death when you have no biological features? Right. It doesn't make any sense. So anyway, all right, that's our abortion.
Well, before you move on, I just want to throw this out there that the original tweet was from a reverend, wasn't it?
It was from, I don't know this gentleman, it was Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II.
Okay. Well, at least, I think the Rolling Stone writer took it too far, but I'd just like to say that he had a point, at least, that these particular officials who were in those states, if they are pro-life, then they should be pro all lives. They shouldn't be. Really, if you're true pro-life, you shouldn't be for, capital punishment, abortion. You should be wanting to protect the sanctity of.
I'll challenge you in the capital punishment one, but there's a distinction there. If you're pro-life, you're pro-innocent life.
Okay.
So
we might argue on
disagree on capital punishment.
One.
I'm not going to go there as far as what my personal stance is, but there is a distinction between capital punishment and abortion.
We can argue about that later. But I just want to say that he had a point he was making. He was trying to basically accuse these people who were dying during protests. Is that what he said?
Twitter. I don't know exactly.
Okay.
I'm assuming.
Just that
based on context,
he was saying, they're for the sanctity of life, they should be for the sanctity of life. I don't know whether or not, because I don't know which governors he was, or which officials he were talking about, which states he was particularly referencing, or what instances he was referencing, so I can't say I'm fully supporting what he said, but I guess I can understand his frustration with the government.
And I'll tell you why it is problematic, and the fact that it does make us susceptible, us being pro-life Christians, susceptible to a criticism that is very common out there. While the criticism itself is illogical, okay, it is not logically hold up, it is still common, it is a stumbling block for a lot of people. And the criticism is this, you see it in memes all the time, it's like, well, you only care about life while it's still inside the womb, you don't care about it when it gets outside the womb. Right. And there's a lot of different ways I've talked about how you can answer that. That's first of all, that's it's logically irrelevant, because if you think about it, wait a minute, are you saying that, if I see someone, if I see some starving child, some parent starving their child, that unless I have the ability to take that child in myself, that I'm not allowed to object to that parent starving their child. So it doesn't hold up logically. Right. It also doesn't hold up factually. As a matter of fact, the overwhelming number of adoptions and pregnancies, crisis pregnancy centers and everything are run by Christians. Yep. So it doesn't hold up factually either. But it's still something you want to make sure that we're not fostering appearances that are necessarily. And sure. You're right. We do need to make sure that we as Christians are respecting all life. Yeah. And not just getting so caught up in respecting life while still in the womb, that we're not also communicating to the world at large that no, we care about life no matter when.
Yeah, absolutely, all the way to the grave. And I will say real quick, because I know we're running on
empty,
running late. Yeah, but even going back to Tim's comment about in Deuteronomy, when God is saying, "Here I set before you life and death, choose life." He's really setting a spiritual principle there. What is life outside of obedience to God, right? Those governed by the flesh, that is death. You will reap death if you are governed by the flesh. Just like we've been going through with the Law and Gospel series, and what Paul talks about in Romans. And so he's saying, choose life, choose to live according to these statutes that I'm setting before you, is what God is saying to the Israelites in Deuteronomy there. And I was listening to, I think it was last night on my way home, and I forget which preacher it was. He was on 95.1. I think it was John MacArthur. Don't quote me on that. But he was going through Romans 1 and talking about just the whole, what we're seeing in society is kind of a breakdown of what God has done in Romans 1. He's talking about the wrath of, getting into the whole wrath thing. There's different types of wrath. There's like an eschatological wrath, which is the end, ultimate eschatological wrath. But there are certain consequences for sin. That's the death that God's talking about. He says, if you choose to live according to the flesh, then you will reap death. And so there are certain consequences of, and Pastor John MacArthur was talking about, the sexual revolution in the 80s and 90s, and what we're seeing now with the whole push for transgender and the LGBTQ agenda, and all of that. What we're seeing is God giving people over. That's what he's talking about in Romans 1. He gave them over. It's like a parent saying, you know what? You make your choice, but you're going to have the consequences along with that. And so what we're seeing, the last thing that he gives them over to is a depraved mind, is what he's talking about. And a depraved mind means just one that can't think rationally, one that is illogical. And we're seeing that in our society today, of people calling good evil and evil good, and we're making laws to uphold that and saying, this is... A man can be whatever he wants. He can be a woman can be a man, or there is no, it's a spectrum. There is no, you can be one thing one day and one thing the next. And we're seeing the fruit of that played out even in this. I took it down a whole other rabbit hole, but
a related rabbit hole. Yeah. But I will say this, and I'll play the flip side of the coin on that. As much as I agree with everything you've said, all right, that. The question then is now, how do we as Christians respond? How do you strike the balance between standing for what is true and also not reacting and responding the same way the world does? Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, as much as we can see a lot of these things going on, and we can see this, the giving over, as you're saying. And so we see people that we think are not thinking rationally and that are saying things that are not true and are not living according to God's word. How do we answer? How do we respond to them? Do we respond to them with, let's face it, there's a lot of Christians out there that respond with a lot of hatred and, vicious talk. And I think, and here's what I get to, and I think of, just parents and their kids. And of course, we all fall short. But, this analogy could be taken the wrong way because it could come across as very patronizing. That's not my intention. Right. Okay. My point of the analogy is this: when your child does something that is wrong, that you don't think they should be doing, hopefully we think of a way to communicate that to them that still shows that we still love them.
Correct.
And that's what I think we as Christians need to work on, is there are lots of things going on in this world, and there have been since the dawn of Christianity. But of course, as to be closer and closer to Jesus' return, it's going to get worse and worse.
Sure.
That are people that are living the wrong way according to God's word, that are thinking the wrong things, that are whatever it may be. How do we respond in such a way that we're inviting them in to hear God's truth, as opposed to pushing them away and driving a wedge between them and God?
Yeah, exactly. We can't think of that particular sin as categorically different than any other sin. They're not, and it's not. Now, it's different. Even the Bible tells us, when a man sins or when a person sins sexually, they sin against their own body. So there's a deeper consequence to that, but it's not categorically any different. And so they're not the enemy. They're the mission field. They are, we still respond in love. And anybody, we are, if anything, Christians should be known for, we're in the business of love and reconciliation and forgiveness. And to your other question of how do we respond then, I think absolutely we don't, God didn't cancel the Israelites when they turned away from him again and again and again and again, right? He could have, he had every right to, but he still lovingly calls them back and lovingly takes them back. Same with us, same with every one of us. We all sin and fall short of the glory of God. 1 John 1:8-9, if we claim to be without sin, the truth is not in us. But if we confess our sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us of all unrighteousness. And so it's that gentle guidance and shepherding, still allowing the choice for, you can choose life, you can choose death. I'm going to lay it before you, and you have that freedom to choose, but the loving thing for me to do is not to just stand back and do nothing, but the loving thing for me to do is to say, here's the truth, you can take it or leave it.
Yes, and we need to be. I was having a conversation with someone the other day about this, and this is one of my biggest concerns within the Christian community today, is that we need to speak truth, we need to speak it in love, we need to not compromise it. At the same time, we need to make sure we're not acting the way the world does and taking to the extreme, because I think too many people today use the fact that there's so much going on in the world that's against God's will. They spend all their time pointing the finger at other people's sins, that it distracts them from reflecting upon their own.
Right.
And that's where I think we have an issue. It's like why people sometimes will accuse Christians of being self-righteous, because if you're focused so much on pointing out all the sin that's out there, what are you doing about the sin that's in here? And are you losing sight on the sin that's in here? Anyway, that's my soapbox on that. But Tim Foster did comment again that the ELCA has sent pastors to go to and bless abortion clinics, which raises that kind of gets into what we were talking about, Tim. Okay, yes, you're right. They're doing that. We disagree with that. How do you respond to that? I'm not necessarily looking at this answer right now because it's already 10 till 1, but that's the kind of thing that I think we as Christians need to be talking about. How's the best way to be true to God's word and yet to respond to things like that, so that we're not driving a wedge between people and God, but we're inviting them to hear the truth of God's word.
Right.
So, all right, you ready for our third story?
Sure.
Out of 4 with
rapid fire. All right. This one is actually Christian News Now, but it's kind of a brief article talking about Alex Trebek, famous host of Jeopardy. He says that he will stop cancer treatment if the latest round is not successful. So he's 79 years old, recently told New York Times that he plans to stop treatment if his current round is unsuccessful, but he's currently doing well. And so he goes on to talk about just a little bit, it's a brief article, but how he is not actively filming episodes of Jeopardy right now, but he's filming segments of it at home, due to the lockdowns. And they'll start airing on July 20th, so I guess I already have started airing as promotional videos and special segments. And he said that's actually seemed to have been helpful for him. It's been kind of uplifting. He feels better since doing that. So I'll just kind of see. Honestly, I was unaware that he was even struggling with cancer, that he was even battling it. So this was all news to me anyway. But it also doesn't surprise me that he says by doing something, by even just the act that he's back to filming and everything has been revitalizing for him, because you hear that a lot with those who retire, it's statistically those who retire and have like a retirement job do far better in their health than those who just retire and stay at home. So I think there really is something to that. But I don't know, what's your take on?
Well, my first take is that I missed a couple comments from the last story, so I'm going to read those real quick. Allison Mayer on YouTube actually says, "Good point. What is life outside of God's truth? How can we expect non-Christians to understand the sanctity of life if they don't value their own life according to the image of God?" And Allison put a pin in that because I actually have a related thought to that on this Alex Trebek story. And then Jeanette Harrington also said, "We should always be willing to forgive. Forgiveness, the only prisoner it frees is yourself." And Jeanette, there's a great portion in C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity that talks about, what forgiveness means. And he talks about how, how can you even, the Bible even says to forgive your enemies. How can we do that? How can we go about forgiving our enemies? And C.S. Lewis says, well, there's one person in everyone's life, just about everyone's life, that has done some horrible things that they know are some horrible things, and yet they're still willing to kind of try to see the best in that person, and that's themselves. And so if you can do that for yourself, then you can do it for others as well. So anyway, get to the Alex Trebek story and the comment I was going to make here about Allison Mayer's thing about seeing themselves as the value in their own life according to the image of God. First of all, I will say this, that I did know Alex Trebek was struggling with cancer. I am a regular viewer of Jeopardy, not every night, but a pretty regular viewer. I've grown up on this rendition of Jeopardy. I mean, since he started in 1984, I was there. I go back to Alex Trebek having a mustache days. I watched the episode when he shaved it. It was great because he just came on and he didn't even say what it was he was talking about. He just looked at the camera and he said something along the lines of, "For those of you wondering, yes, I did it. I just felt it was time. Moving on." It was great. It was a great moment. I love Alex Trebek. I will admit, while I don't know obviously the man personally, I can't help but notice there's typically a lot of questions on Jeopardy that have to do with Christianity and the Bible, which I also enjoy because I know something about that. I feel smart when those categories come up. So anyway, but this raises an interesting question. The headline here, I don't know if it's misleading is the right word, because it does say, like, if this latest round doesn't work, he's not going to forego any his treatments. But he seems to then be saying that things are going okay. Right. But so how do you define whether it works or not? But it raises an interesting question that kind of ties in to the abortion question we were just talking about. And we were talking about respect for life at the beginning of life. Now, what about at the end of life? And what is a Christian response to people who are suffering from some very debilitating diseases that are going to kill them? How do we feel about euthanasia? And what I'll say, and I'll throw in my 2 cents about how I agree completely with Mr. Trebek here. There's a distinction. Because let's say that somebody says that, I think that Alex Trebek is perfectly right, like I do. I say, if this doesn't work and he just wants to forego future treatment and let the cancer take its course, that is his right to do. And I do personally believe that in this circumstance. So somebody can object to me and say, well, wait a minute, Ken, I thought you said you were pro-life. How come you're pro-life at the beginning, but not telling Alex Trebek that he needs to do whatever he can to try to prolong his life as long as he can? There's a difference at the end of life between active euthanasia, in other words, actively killing someone, and allowing the disease process to take its course. And the reason I think that Christians can rest assured that there is a relevant distinction there is this, because according to Christianity, while this physical life is important and it has inherent value, it does not have ultimate value, because there's another life after this one. And so, yes, we do want to respect human life and give it the proper value it deserves, but when you're dealing with someone who is undergoing a lot of suffering, And respect for human life means we should not actively kill them.
Right.
But if they're having some kind of disease process that's eating away at them to begin with, and you get someone like Alex Trebek that says, "Hey, look, it just isn't working. It's clear it's going to kill me anyway. I'd rather not have chemotherapy after chemotherapy and have to go through all the suffering for prolonged, just to prolong the inevitable and be suffering while that happens." I think I can respect that decision.
Yeah, there's an argument to be made there about by foregoing continuing treatments, the quality of life, at least for whatever time he has left, would be better than being sick from chemotherapy for the rest of his life.
And is that a decision he should be allowed to make?
Right.
And I say yes in those circumstances.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that, and that is not, by him having the right to forego treatment is not equivalent to, say, physician-assisted suicide. That's
Right.
not. I think there's a distinction there. Absolutely, you're not actively either doing it yourself or helping somebody to commit suicide, or you just end their life. So yeah, I think it is definitely within his right to choose that, and who knows, maybe then, ultimately God is the divine physician. He gives us doctors and medicine and the knowledge to treat people. But when it's our time, it's our time.
Yeah.
God is the author of that, and so
Keep praying for him.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I hope I do. Purely selfishly, I love him on Jeopardy, so I want to keep him around forever. But
maybe they can get Will Ferrell with a mustache.
Ching. So, all right. Anyway, I thought that's the reason I kind of want to talk about Alex Trebek, not just because he's obviously meant a lot to me, as a viewer over the years, but I thought it an interesting tie into that abortion story as far as the right to life and whether he should have the right to choose to do this. And
Sure.
I do think we as Christians need to. There's some research out there, for example. People will then ask, well, wait a minute, why don't you support active euthanasia, so to speak? And I think that there is a difference between actively killing someone and just allowing something that's already in them to take its natural course. And also there's research that shows, frankly, people that are typically people that are seeking out active euthanasia, they do, and understandably, they are suffering from some other mental condition, whether it be severe depression or whatever it may be. And so the question is, if you have someone who's in that severe mental state, are they really in the position to be making that decision? Even, and so there is a loving thing to do here, and the loving thing to do is to treat that condition and try to help them out with that. And there have been plenty of examples of people who have gone on to, who have wanted euthanasia for one reason or another, but they've gotten treatment for the mental, the depression or whatever it may be, and they've ended up living quite a while longer, and they've been very happy about it. So
yeah, and there's been studies I can't cite right now, but I firmly believe there is a correlation between mental health and physical health too. So if the mental health of the patient begins to improve, then also in some cases you see the physical health improve as well.
Yeah. And Jeanette Harrington here says, all lives matter from the moment of conception through eternity. Yes, God is in control. Like Ben said, when it's your time, it's your time. Yeah, and I think, and I've talked about this on the show before, I think we as Christians, we always say this is water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective, and hopefully if you're a regular viewer of the show, you're at least starting to get some insight into my way of thinking. Empathy is a big thing for me, and looking at life from an eternal perspective is a big thing for me. And so that's kind of where I get my consistent framework, is how I look at these issues, is I look at, the fact that we are created in God's image, so that does give us, inherent value, but at the same time, we look at life from an eternal perspective. If this life was all there is, then I think there's an argument that, no, you've got to try to prolong it no matter what. But because this life is not all there is, then it does become an acceptable option for Christians to say, let the disease run its course. That may be. So, all right. Anything else on that one?
No, I think that was a good.
We've exhausted that one. I should have ended with the Will Ferrell joke, I think. That would have been a good time to transfer it over. So, all right, let's go on to our fourth and final story of the day. And our fourth and final story comes out of Miami. There's a church down in Miami, or I don't know if it's in Miami proper, the Miami area. It's called the Kendall Lakes Catholic Church. And they, outside of their church building, but still on their property for a number of decades, they have had a statue of Jesus Christ outside of their church. And we're not getting into the idolatry debate here as far as whether or not you should have statues of Jesus. That's not the point we're talking about today. If you want to put in the comment section, you can, but that's not why we're raising this story, okay? Because it's we're already over an hour into this show. But the point is this: they earlier this week, Wednesday morning, about 8 o'clock Wednesday morning, somebody came into the church and found that the statue had its head taken off. All right, and as the way they described it is, this is a sturdy statue. This is not something you could do accidentally. Oh, gee, I bumped into the Jesus statue and his head fell off. You know, it clearly had to have been done intentionally. All right. So they have surveillance video, supposedly it has been handed over to the police. I don't know what it shows, obviously, at this point in time. But the immediate response, understandably, from people that are affiliated with the church, has been, this is an attack on the church. And, of course, there was an incident also in Orlando area not too long ago where someone actually drove a vehicle into a church and, poured gasoline and set it on fire as well. So people are looking at it in that context, obviously, understandably. So my question for you then is, what do you make of, and how should we respond when things like this happen?
Well, again, I don't think it should necessarily come as a surprise, but given that, when we see the culture that we're in, and the way that it has been trending for the past several decades at least, probably a century, but or more. I don't know, however long it's been trending. But when we see the culture where it's at, and when it's a cancel culture and it's just so explosive at times, then we really shouldn't be surprised when the message of Christ is people take offense to it, because it is an offensive message to some people, to those who don't want to hear it. So in that regard, I'm not surprised. How do we respond? I think, well, first of all, I would do the due diligence of, is there any security footage or anything? Try to, because there is some, it's vandalism. So a law was broken, and so I would still advocate for justice for that. Would I go out and start, getting ready to be attacked on a daily basis? I don't think we're at that point yet. But I'll just say I'm not really surprised by it, but I think really my response would be we pray and we reach out in love to the community, same as it always has. The point I had made, I don't know, whatever the last thing we did, when I said ultimately it is just a building. When we talked about the,
you stole my thunder.
Hagia Sophia,
toot your horn, man. It was the Hagia Sophia story or Hagia Sophia. We talked about last week.
Whichever, and so in the same thing now it does impact the Orlando church when it was set on fire. Obviously, it impacts their worship, so they can't worship there as they are accustomed to. Does taking the head off of a Jesus statue affect your worship? No, not really. I mean, the actual Jesus still has his head intact, and he is still the head of the church. And so
he's got some holes in him, though. I understand.
Yeah, but he is perfectly sufficient and powerful, regardless of that. And so actually, and it's on purpose that he has those. It serves as a reminder to us for his wounds that we are healed. And so
that was the point of the joke.
I know, yeah. Just for anybody out there that didn't get the point of the joke.
Look up Doubting Thomas.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'll just say I'm not really surprised, and it doesn't really change anything as far as our faith goes.
Yeah, and that's you want to know why I included this story today, and it was that because I thought that point you made in regard to the Hagia Sophia story last week was so well taken, at least by me, that we talked about this historic church being turned into a mosque, and we didn't like it, and we went into a lot of different things, but ultimately one thing you said, it is a building. Our faith is not confined to buildings.
Right.
Similarly here, it's like, I agree with you. There's something was wrong that was done here. There was a law that was broken. There was vandalism that was committed. But ultimately, it was a statue. It doesn't need to, and we don't need to let it. It shouldn't affect our worship. And it shouldn't affect our relationship with Jesus. And at the same time, that means we need to control our emotions when something like this happens, because we can be proponents of justice, absolutely, and that's not even an emotional response. That's just, yeah, you did something wrong. Justice does demand that and that's why we have governments and everything to make sure that justice is carried out. And so I can be in favor of whoever this is being caught and facing whatever the criminal justice system says is appropriate under the laws of the land. That being said, if the same person were to come to me, if I was a member of this church and the same person were to come to me next week and want to come sit in the pew, the answer is, here you go.
Yeah.
And I think we're living in a time right now where there's a lot of raw emotions out there on a lot of issues, and we need, no matter where we stand on all these issues, I think we need as Christians to make sure that we're not letting our emotions take over being good ambassadors for Jesus Christ. And that's hard, and that's tough to do, especially when there's what appears to be a direct attack on Jesus right now. And I'll give you an example, and this bothers me. I am one of those people that even when I'm around non-Christians and they use the Lord's name in vain, it really bothers me. All right, it really bothers me. I want to jump up and down and say, and jump on them over it. But it gets back to, and of course I got to make sure I'm giving the right person credit here. I know this. There was a comment where one of the comments somebody made earlier in this show was about non-Christians. And how should we expect?
Allison.
I thought it was Allison, but I just looked through her comments and I'm not seeing it here. Struggle, blah, blah, blah. When I speak to people getting older, da, 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 I think it's fair. There's another conversation. How can we? Good point. Thank you. Yes, Allison's last comment. How can we expect non-Christians to understand the sanctity of life if they don't value their own life according to the image of God? And so when I hear somebody use the Lord's name in vain and they're not a Christian, I try to rein in my emotions. Now, it's not to say I've never said anything or never said anything, hey, I'd really prefer you not do that, as opposed to, what do you,
Right, exactly.
There's a difference. You like that when my wife has the headphones on? She probably hates me right now. They're just slammed on the thing. But there's a difference in the way we respond when stuff like that happens that concerns me, I guess.
Right. Well, and even in our response, that could be more impactful. If they are expecting, I guess you can't really speak to the motives of why this person would take off the head of a statue of Jesus, but maybe expecting the church to retaliate and get angry and get emotional, and when they don't, it's in effect turning the other cheek, and that's even more impactful, right? If you look at that, the message that sends, that was really a radical message that Jesus said, when someone slaps you on the cheek, turn to them your other cheek also. Right. It's a humility, and it's a deep, profound forgiveness that really causes people to reflect on their own actions and choices. They're like,
have we lost sight of that somewhat as a church today? And I'm just throwing this out there because you're smarter than me and stuff like that. But you look at the early church, all right? And one of the defining factors of the early church was the way they stood out. People they will know we are Christians by our love, whatever. Yeah. But that for one reason or another, the Christians stood out from the rest of the culture. Have we lost that?
I think in some ways we have. And that's, you look at the statistics, and I don't know what the current one is, but even however many years ago when 75% of Americans are Christian, you look at that statistic and you just know, well, that can't be true because 3 out of the 4 people that I know just walking around in the world, I don't see the fruits of a walk with Christ. So you narrow it down into, they say they're Christians, well, you narrow it down to profession of faith, and then narrow it down even further to fruits in keeping with repentance, and you see that statistic is actually much, much smaller. And so I think, but the church, even in the church, I think that's in itself a mission field. Those sitting in the pews on a Sunday morning, or even watching the screen on a Sunday morning, need to hear the truth in love and be reminded of, and honestly take a hard look at ourselves and say, what is, going back to that, am I owning my faith? Am I renting my faith? Am I just a nominal Christian? Am I a Christian in name only, or am I owning this? And are there certain fruits that I'm cultivating?
Yeah, and I guess maybe this is, and I know we got to close things up here, but and I don't say this to toot my own horn, as an example of something that I've done a few times in the past, that I kind of want to challenge the Christian community, anybody who's watching this with. Yeah, we speak truth. We show love. We'll do things like this thing we just did with the food truck. You take it out, we show love to people. But here's my question. When was the last time you showed love for someone who you had disagreed with, and they know? I mean, there's a particular old high school friend of mine that I'm not going to call anybody out by name or anything, but this individual, this was a couple years ago now, there's no doubt that this individual lives a lifestyle that they know I disagree with, okay? We're still Facebook friends, we still communicate, and we've had conversations, Facebook conversations, because they're not near here, about different issues, whether it be not just their lifestyle, but other political issues, or, I don't get political typically, but let's take abortion, for example. Sure. There's things that are considered political issues that certainly carry over. Yeah. But we've had conversations about that. That's been very clear that we've disagreed about. And yet this person is living a very hard life and has had several times where they've had particular needs that need to be met. And you know what? I've done what I could to help meet them. And so my question, I guess, for the Christian community, how that's what kind of thing, and I've there's been plenty of times, I'm sure, when I've fallen short of doing that, and I should have. Yeah. But my question is, what would the world think of Christians if we as a community did that? Right. Not just showed love to random strangers, but to the, love your enemy. And I hate to use that in this context, but even the people that we are actively out there disagreeing with. How about if your next breath is, and how can I serve you? Yeah. What can I do to help you out? So they'd realize that it's not just lip service, Anyway.
That's kind of, say what you will about the Amish community, but when I look at them, I'm humbled because when the world looks at the Amish community, they don't see, now part of that is because they're not as involved with the world, so to speak, in terms of, online and everything like that. But when you look at their the forgiveness, I keep going back to that story of the one gunman in Pennsylvania, I think, that went in and shot those children, and the Amish community immediately responded with such grace and forgiveness. And I think that's the norm in that community. And there, and there certainly are Christian values that are at the root of that. And so if all of Christianity could be that and more, that's the picture of heaven. That's the picture of the New Jerusalem, a city of people where there is no sin. That's...
Jeanette Harrington says here on Facebook, using the Lord's name in vain is one of my pet peeves too. Once I hear it said, I tend to shut down on the conversation. Yeah, and that's, I'm the same way, Jeanette, and I guess what I'm challenging myself as much here too is if, it's one thing if you hear it spoken by a believer, all right, that's a different category.
Hold them accountable.
Right? Yeah, hold them accountable. But if you hear it spoken by someone who's not, how do we respond with truth and love and service? Those are when was the last time we had somebody did something back to us and the next thing out of our breath was, hey, how can I help you out with X, Y, or Z? Yeah. So anyway, all right. Anything else that we haven't, I thought my wife said something, but I think it was just my own echo. I was hearing echo back to me in this big room. So, oh, okay. So, all right. Anything else?
I think we're good.
I think we're good. We got about 15 minutes to eat lunch before our next gig, so we should wrap this thing up. What do you say? My daughter wants to strangle me, so she wants to eat too. And I think all of our three things take the microwave. So you know what? We can microwave my lunch last, so you guys can get your. Yeah, that's how they're both agreeing with me on that one. So, all right. Well, hey, thank you very much for joining us here. Thank you, Ben. And again, reminder: we are here every Monday at 12 noon live on Facebook and YouTube. You can feel free if you're not watching us live and you want to comment on this after the fact. We don't always succeed, but we do try to go back and take a look at the comments from week to week so that if you do have something else that you felt you wanted to contribute, but you just weren't able to watch us live, go ahead and put it in the comments section anyway, and hopefully we'll be able to get back to you next week. All right? So very good. Thank you very much. Thank you all the ladies backstage there helping us out and make this run smoothly. And thank you all out there in internet land. God bless.